So it's my honor, I'm Spiro Condos, I'm also on the board. It's my honor to introduce Robyn Stein DeLuca, who is a Ph.D. in health psychology. She has been teaching women's studies for 15 years over at Stony Brook, and she's given a TED Talk called The Good News About PMS with over 1 million views. Her book is coming out this May called The Hormone Myth. Right now it's on Amazon pre-order, so you can look it up there. And without any further ado, Robyn Stein DeLuca.
I'm going to try first without the microphone. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you to the New York City Skeptics for inviting me. I have a feeling I'm talking about topics that you guys usually don't get into on a regular basis, so I'm excited to be doing that. So people have a lot of opinions about the differences between men and women, and these are book titles that you can get right now. These are books on Amazon. If you just type in differences about men and women. And these are not joke books. At first when I saw, especially the waffles one, I thought, no, this has got to be a joke book. They're serious. And the last one, the growing gulf between men and women, the idea that there's just a chasm between personality, behavior, motivation, and that idea is commonly based in the idea that the difference is biological. There's some neurological difference, some genetic difference, and certainly hormones play a big role in how people estimate the differences between men and women. Testosterone, the source of men's libido, and thought to be the cause of their aggression, competition, and if you watch the commercials, also the source of their energy. You've got schlumpy, low-T guy who is very boring and has an awful life, and then the guy who's got the right amount of testosterone. He's dancing, he's got a sexy babe on his arm, all is good. But nothing seems to have the power for good or evil than women's hormones. According to the hormone myth, which is found in popular culture, but also medical and psychological literature, there's this concept that any changes in women's hormones, up, down, too high, too low, is going to cause some kind of psychological or physical illness. And the two phenomena that most clearly represent this assumption are PMS, premenstrual syndrome, and menopause. And today I want to talk about what does research have to say about those two conditions. What do women actually experience? Do hormones have anything to do with them? And why do we have the ideas that we do? So I'm going to start with PMS. So how many people have heard of PMS? Right? Everybody knows. Women go a little crazy right before they get their periods. There's a general assumption that changes in hormones cause extreme emotions, and that this happens to the majority of women. PMS is assumed to be everywhere. If you look at women's magazines, these are 2016 magazine covers. PMS is something we've got to beat. It's making us shop too much. The food we eat can make a difference. Red Book tells its readers 85% of women suffer from PMS. And even the Wall Street Journal had an article that said, do you become a witch every month? To its female readers. And, oops. All right, what did I do? Technical difficulties. I think I touched something I wasn't supposed to touch. Okay, good. So there's the ubiquitous PMS joke. These were really easy to find on the internet. Apparently a woman with PMS is homicidal, is psychotic, eats all the time, but is also at the same time sobbing, is in a bad mood, she hates people, she only likes rich men apparently, and may kill you. One of my favorites is what do you get when you combine PMS with a GPS? Anybody know the answer to that one? You get a bitch who knows how to find you. So from all of this ubiquity of PMS, you'd think, wow, it's everywhere, everyone talks about it, there must be a mountain of research that supports its existence. But after 5 decades of research, there's no consensus on the definition, the cause, the treatment, or even the existence of PMS as this common syndrome. And psychologists generally define it as involving negative physical, behavioral, and cognitive changes. But here's where it gets tricky. Up to 150 different symptoms have been used to diagnose PMS, and these are just a few of those. Some researchers said you had to have 5 symptoms, some said 3. Some said only really severe symptoms mattered, but others said, oh no, mild symptoms are indicative of something as well. And some researchers said, well, it had to happen during a specific time of the month. Others said, no, anytime a woman is moody during the month, we're going to call that PMS. So for many years, there's a lot of confusion. And when psychologists tried to estimate the prevalence of PMS, their estimates ranged from 3% to 97%. So at the same time, almost no one and almost everyone had PMS. And the research that was done on PMS between 1950 and 1990 had some serious flaws, really methodologically troubled. First, most studies asked women to recall retrospectively, looking to the past. How did you feel the week before your period a month ago? Who remembers that stuff? I mean, people's memories are, not that reliable. A better way to do it would be prospectively, to have people keep notes about their mood every day, keep a daily log for a couple months at a time. Many studies only looked at one cycle. So if we're talking about a syndrome that's supposed to be cyclical, you'd want to look at least 2 or 3 cycles in a row to see if some pattern was going to emerge. The great majority of studies only had subjects who were white middle-class women. And this is problematic because we know there's a strong cultural component to belief and experience of PMS-type symptoms. It's nearly unheard of outside of Western nations. Most studies didn't use control groups. So if you want to understand what are the characteristics of a group that have a certain disorder, you need to be able to compare them to people who don't have that disorder. And these studies didn't do that. And finally, many different researchers used different questionnaires focusing on different symptoms, different timing, and different severity. So it was really all over the place. But in 1994, the 4th version of the DSM, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it's like the PDR for mental health people, they tightened up the diagnosis. They renamed it Pmdd, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and dysphoria refers to a feeling of unease or anxiety. And they said that now there were just 11 symptoms, so we're down from 150. That's a good thing. There's just 11 possible symptoms, and you have to have at least 5 of them. But they have to take place in a very specific time, the final week before menstruation starts, and it has to get better once menstruation begins and be gone the week after that. These first 4 symptoms, the person has to have at least one of these to kind of begin qualifications for the disorder. And then the other 4 symptoms could come from this list or from these other symptoms which involve lack of concentration or some of the physical aspects of how women might feel before menstruation as far as bloating or swelling or things like that. Okay, so they also decide to tighten it up even more. To be given this diagnosis, your symptoms had to involve clinically significant distress. And what that means is you can't just be cranky or moody or uncomfortable. Your distress has to affect your functioning, your relationships, your work, your school. And now it had to be measured for at least 2 cycles in a row. That pattern had to be observed. And finally, psychologists wanted to make sure this wasn't just an exacerbation of an existing disorder. Someone had, for example, bipolar disorder or was having a major depressive episode. Maybe this was just another representation of that. They wanted to be able to examine that as well. So using this criteria, what percentage of women do you think are diagnosed with PMDD?
Low single digits.
Low single digits. Anybody else? No takers? 15? 20? All right, well, the latest studies that we have, on average, between 3 and 8%. Not all women, not most women, not even a lot of women, 3 to 8%. And for everyone else, things like happy occasions or stressful situations or even day of the week are more powerful predictors of mood than time of the month. And this is information that psychologists have had since the early 90s. In 2002, my colleagues and I published a paper reviewing the PMS and Pmdd research. Did you get it?
Yeah.
And there's been many similar articles, so this is not news. So why hasn't this information trickled down to the public? Well, I'm going to get to the answer in just a little bit. First, I want to look at the other phenomenon I mentioned that people like to think hormones play a massive role in, and that's menopause. And because they know with menopause there are some changes in hormones, that must make people really crazy. And popular culture has gone a really long way in perpetuating that idea. For those of us in the room who are really old, we remember All in the Family was imagined to be a groundbreaking episode when menopause was mentioned. And if I could do my best Edith voice, when Archie hears this, he ain't gonna love me no more. That's how she would have said it. And a Woody Allen movie, he's speaking to Diane Keaton, for crying out loud, save a little crazy for menopause. Later years, there's a Sex and the City episode where Samantha thinks she's becoming menopausal, and it completely freaks her out. And more recently, there's a CBS comedy, Mom, that Allison Janney stars in. She's the character of Bonnie. And when a doctor tells her, oh, what's going on with her, she's menopausal, she completely goes into denial because it must be so awful. And she runs around with crazy hair and does things like throws a phone out the window. I mean, it's funny, but it's definitely presenting this idea that people are just nuts when they get to menopause. And now I want to show you a commercial that was aired in 2009 for Jack in the Box. It is a commercial for their smoothies. So the idea is that the hot flashes that women have make them so insane that these Jack in the Box smoothies are going to make it all better. But let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. How do I do this? All right. Getting there. That did it. Let's try that. Just update it. No? Oh. I just had it here. Hold on. Was this one? Try that. Okay, here we go.
That's it. That's his house.
That is not it. There we go. Oh.
You never know it, thanks to the... Am I going through menopause? You bet I am. But you'd never know it, thanks to the new tropical fruit smoothie at Jack in the Box. With my hot flashes blindsiding me, I need to cool off fast. That's why I love this delicious combination of mango, banana, and frozen yogurt. It keeps me cool, refreshed, and best of all, it helps me from going all, you know.
Street rat crazy?
Yeah.
Alright, so being menopausal is going to make you street rat crazy. Okay, how do I make this back to...
Should get it.
Oh, okay. Alright, so there's a lot of these cultural representations that once you get to menopause, boy, watch out. You are not just crazy, but you're also going to be weepy and sad, and life is just going to be awful. So what do we know about menopause? This is just a very brief, very quick biological look. When women are called premenopausal, it's they're in their 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s, their periods are just chugging along just fine. Their hormone levels are such that they maintain ovulation and menstruation throughout the month. Once you get to what's called perimenopause, that's when the change begins. Hormone levels start fluctuating. Some changes in intermittent periods, you might get it 1 month, might not get it the next. And this is where the most common symptom of menopause starts to happen is the hot flash. But there's some other physical symptoms, common ones like insomnia and fatigue. And some people get a lot of symptoms, some don't. And menopause actually can't be diagnosed until you have gone without a period for 12 months. It's a retrospective diagnosis. You are a menopausal woman when you have gone a whole year without menstruating. So that's just kind of a basic look at the different phases. Now, in terms of how people have thought about this time of life, prior to the 1800s, people really didn't think about menopause much because women didn't live that long. You just didn't get to that point where you would have your periods start missing and whatnot. So it wasn't, it was heard of. I mean, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, Sarah is talked about. She was beyond the age of childbearing, but it was fairly rare. By the mid-1800s to 1900s, the beginning of the medical field as kind of an industry, doctors understood menopause as just kind of a point that women get to, didn't associate it with any kind of pathology, no problems. Even the medical textbooks at the time didn't even mention it. Doctors thought it was neutral and generally positive, and I have here, yay, no more babies, because birth control was not widely available at that time. So this is when women could say, oh, wow, I don't have to think about babies anymore after probably having a lot of pregnancies. By the 30s and 40s, medical journals, nursing journals started to talk about the phenomenon of menopause, but still said that most women didn't experience any symptoms severe enough that they needed treatment. But by the 1950s, there was a different undercurrent in the way it was talked about. Doctors warned that menopause would bring on emotional turmoil and could threaten a family's tranquility. They would cite examples of menopausal women getting annoyed with their husbands and refusing to make dinner. This was not acceptable. And the popular advice literature told women not to figure out why they might be unhappy, but to get a hold of themselves and deal with their feelings. One female physician actually recommended that they simply pretend they did not feel that way. But the idea of menopause as a deficiency disease was legitimized and popularized by a book written by Robert Wilson in 1966, Forever Feminine. And it's really hard to know where to start with this book. It is such a compendium of misogyny and chauvinism. Throughout the book, he emphasizes the fundamental importance of women's attractiveness. He says a woman's physical appeal is her starting capital in the venture of life, the ante which gets her into the game. He sympathizes and damns menopausal women with the comment, no woman can escape this horror of this living decay. So psychologically, he thought it could go two ways. That either you could get this kind of awful, dull-minded, sharp-tongued woman, the she-devil that you really don't want, or, let me quote to you from the book, the woman eventually subsides into an uneasy apathy that is indeed a form of death within life. They acquire a vapid, cow-like feeling where the world appears as though through a gray veil, and they live as docile, harmless creatures, missing most of life's values. So not an attractive picture either way. Also keep in mind, I'll be telling you about Wyeth, the company that created hormones that people could take as a medication. He was a consultant for them. They helped him write the book, and they also bought extra copies of the book to keep it on the bestseller list. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so what was going to help with this vapid cow-like creature? Hormones to the rescue. He and other physicians said that women should take these throughout their lives, daily medication, and it was going to restore their beauty, make them agreeable, lovely people. Originally, once estrogen was manufactured, So I've got Premarin, the name of that drug, enclosed with dollar signs because the amount of money they made is just unbelievable. And the name of it, Premarin, stands for pregnant mare's urine. That's where the estrogen was extracted. I know, it's disgusting. Pregnant mare's urine. That's where they extracted the estrogen from. And it was originally only prescribed to treat physical symptoms. It was very effective at getting rid of hot flashes. And that's how it was used originally. But then, especially when this idea of deficiency disease, and it was going to keep your woman from being crabby and getting old and ugly, then the number of prescriptions increased and it went up. Okay. So this is an ad in a medical journal directed towards doctors. And, I'm going to read to you the bottom, but the headline says, "Husbands too like Premarin." And you know, these people, they're yachting, they're on their boat, they're just looking, you know, glowing, happy. But this is what the text says. "The physician who puts a woman on Premarin when she is suffering from the menopause usually makes her pleasant to live with once again. It's no easy thing for a man to take the stings and barbs of business life, then to come home to the turmoil of a woman going through the change." If she is not on Premarin, that is. But have her begin estrogen replacement therapy with Premarin. It makes all the difference in the world. She experiences relief from physical distress, and also that very real thing called a sense of well-being returns. She is a happy woman again, something for which husbands are grateful.
What's the date of that ad?
That is 1960 something, in the early 60s.
What does that last paragraph say? Because grounded is the top of the third column.
And here it just says, Premarin conjugated estrogens, a complete natural estrogen complex is available as tablets and liquid, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Nothing too interesting. Okay. So today, though, this idea that menopause makes women crazy is still around. Again, if you look on Amazon, these are the titles of books about menopause. We've got to battle it, it's a war again, it's like PMS all over again. Husbands are in trouble, they need a survival guide. And then the last one, it's just great. What the hell happens to me? Menopause has wreaked its havoc. So the two broad cultural and medical assumptions about menopause. The first is that it's experienced by women as an awful, stressful, disturbing time. And the second is that decreases in reproductive hormones cause major depression. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what studies say about those two assumptions. Okay, so most women who have experienced menopause rate it as not that big of a deal. Only between 10 and 15% of women of menopausal age seek medical treatment, and that's mostly for physical symptoms rather than psychological ones. But there was a great study done. They looked at 2,500 women, and they had women who were premenopausal and women who were postmenopausal. And it turns out the thing that makes you think menopause is really awful is not having been through it. That premenopausal women were the ones who thought it was going to involve terrible physical symptoms, it was going to make them upset, it was going to be an awful time of life. But when they asked women who had already been through menopause, they were like, not a big deal. And it's interesting to think about what sort of questions get asked in research, that the culture you come from, the gender you are. Few researchers have thought to ask, is there anything positive about going through menopause? And one study did. They asked women general attitudes and gave them open-ended questions so they could really write whatever their experience was. And it turns out that there were some recurring positive themes to that time of life. First, no more periods, yay! No more making sure you're packing tampons and pads and you're not going to get caught without it. And you can have sex without worrying about pregnancy. That's a fabulous thing and made women very happy. And for a lot of women, the time when they're going through menopause coincides with the empty nest time. And they're excited about the time and energy they can now put into their own interests. And getting to this point, 40s and 50s, a lot of women appreciate the wisdom, they've accumulated over time and they have the confidence that maybe they lacked when they were in their 20s and 30s, and they find that very energizing. So it really does matter who's asking the questions when it comes to research, particularly psychological research. Okay. All right, so the second assumption about menopause is that the inevitable decline in hormones is going to cause women to have a major depression. And that idea is out there for a few reasons. One of the biggest is that in general, women worldwide are diagnosed with major depression in a ratio of 2 to 1 to men. That's a difference you see in Western nations, in other parts of the world. It's a fairly consistent one. And many people believe it must be due to biological differences, and hormones are a popular culprit in people's theories. But this is not supported by research. Here's a breakdown of when people are diagnosed with major depressive episodes by age and by sex. So you can see that as women get into their 50s, 60s, it goes down. There's not an increase in depression, it decreases. Sad to say for the young ladies in the audience, the highest number is 18 to 34. The women most likely to be diagnosed with a major depressive disorder are those who have children under 5 and the home. A very challenging time of life. So first, we see there's not a lot of women who are depressed at this age, but okay, some women do get depressed at that age. So should we see, well, maybe for that small group of people, they have a vulnerability to this decrease in hormones. So there have been a couple of studies that examined hormone level changes and depression. And there's only a couple because they cost a lot of money. When you do research, of course, you've got to apply for grants. But if you want to measure hormone levels, you have to do biological testing, either urine or blood. And the second reason you need a lot of money is because people don't readily volunteer their urine and their blood. They would like to get paid to come in. So there aren't a lot of studies, but there happen to be 2 really well done studies. One looked at 220 premenopausal women over 10 years, a really nice longitudinal study. Every year they had them come in, measured estrogen levels, and they evaluated depression with the SCID, which is the Structured Clinical Interview, which is the only way to diagnose major depressive episode. That there are other kinds of quick ways you can get at someone feeling sad, feeling moody, but the only way to really identify who is having this disorder is to use the SCID, and that takes a good hour, could be an hour and a half, to conduct. So that's another reason why these studies are few and far between. But the results were no relationship was found between estrogen levels and major depression. A second study looked at 436 women over 11 years, again, a nice amount of time. Same methods, same results. So if hormones don't play a role, why do this small minority of women get depressed at that age? Well, based on a review of the literature, there are some common predictors of depression. And you look at these and you just go, wow, that's common sense. The degree of control over your environment, how do you control your time, where you live, your finances, the strength of your social network. Do you have people who look after you, who you care about? For women, the number of roles inhabited is predictive of good mental health. The more roles, the better, meaning that if you've been a mother, a wife, an employee, a community leader, that these things contribute to good mental health. And for women who maybe weren't in the workforce, when they get to that age where there's an empty nest, they may have more trouble coping with it. So the more roles, the better. Obviously, physical health, if you're worried about illness, that is going to be tougher to deal with. And women who are at retirement age deal with a lot of economic problems, much more likely to be in poverty than men. And once you get into your 50s and 60s, people start dying, which is really depressing. So you look at this list and go, well, that makes a lot of sense, that these would be predictors of whether women get depressed or not. But do remember that most women in this age range don't get depressed. Okay. So one thing I want to be clear about, I'm not saying that changes in hormones don't cause some physical and emotional symptoms. What I'm saying is they don't cause a mental disorder. The changes they cause are very much in the normal range of behavior. So, if science tells us that menstruation and menopause don't cause the majority of women to get mental disorders, why does this myth persist? I mean, it is a tough one to get rid of. And I think there are a lot of social forces involved in it. Certainly the onslaught of messages women get from books, magazines, the internet, TV, movies, that every woman gets PMS, every menopausal woman is crazy, goes a long way in solidifying women's belief this must be true. There's one study that shows that the more women believe that people get PMS, the more likely they are to erroneously say they have it. And what I mean by that is you say to someone, okay, do you have PMS? And oh, yes, I do. I get very cranky and sad and irritated right before I get my period. But then when you have them document their moods for 2 or 3 months in a row, there's no correlation between time of the month and their mood. Another issue as to why this myth hangs around has to do with the narrow boundaries of the feminine role. Psychologists Joan Chrysler and Jane Usher say that taking on the label of being hormonal has become kind of a free pass for women to express anger or be cranky, typically unladylike attributes. And when we think about, well, who's a good woman? You look at a Mother's Day card, someone who's loving, caring, takes great satisfaction in caring for other people. How does she get out of that? Well, saying, oh, I'm hormonal kind of gives you a way to say, I'm not going to be emotional available for maybe this little bit of time, but I still get to keep my good woman crown. I still get to keep my label. And then finally, it's been very useful in keeping women in their place. Anyone who wants to keep women out of positions of power can use the hormone myth like a bludgeon. We heard the menstruation accusation heard around the world when Donald Trump was very unhappy with Megyn Kelly's questions, and he, of course said, well, it must be your period because, gosh, she just said some awful things to me. So that's what I'm going to say about her. In 2009, when Sonia Sotomayor was getting confirmed that her Senate hearings were going on to become a Supreme Court justice, a conservative radio host said this about her: let's hope that the key conferences aren't when she's menstruating or something, or just before she's going to menstruate. That would really be bad. Lord knows what we would get then. So you can really impugn a woman's credibility and competence with just a swipe of that period card. And then this was a column that appeared in Time magazine last year, that Hillary Clinton is the perfect age to be president. And it was really an awful backhanded compliment. It was written by Julie Holland, who's an MD. She wrote the book Moody Bitches, where she says, yes, women are really moody, but they've got to claim it. And she basically said that Hillary, now almost 70, we should be so excited that she's going to be president because all those pesky hormones, they're all low now, and we don't have to worry about them threatening her mood or her rationality. So what does that mean? Any woman who maybe is under 55 doesn't have the competence or rationality to be president? These ideas are just soaked in our culture. Okay. There's also a lot of money to be made by perpetuating this myth. Treating PMS is a thriving industry. There's lots of books. You look at websites, they're going to sell you products and vitamins and supplements that will treat your PMS. And many of them suggest medications that doctors will prescribe for you, like antidepressants or hormones. And that makes money for doctors because if you are prescribed those medications, you have to have follow-up every 3 months. That's what medical protocol says. And pharmaceutical companies make lots of money because now you're convinced you need to take a pill every day. But if you look at all of these sources that say, oh yes, these are great medications for PMS, all of them say But you should keep in mind, success of these medications vary from woman to woman. That should be a big fat red flag. That tells you that there's something really inconsistent going on, because the FDA says that if we want to say a medication is effective, it has to have a significant impact on a large proportion of the target population, and that's not the case at all with these medications. Some studies have found that using hormones or antidepressants don't even work better than placebos in terms of addressing symptoms that women find troubling. Over-the-counter drugs like Midol say that they will treat PMS symptoms like irritability or anxiety, even though they only include a diuretic, Tylenol, and caffeine. Now, I'm a believer in the magic of caffeine, but reducing anxiety is not one of the things that it can do for you. And to get girls early believing in all of this, Midol in 2002 introduced Teen Midol. And they had a large campaign through the internet, through email, convincing girls, oh yes, everybody gets PMS, it's going to turn you into a monster. But wait, there's something you can do. You can take Midol and you'll be a human being again. And recent sales revenue for Midol was $48 million. Okay. So now in terms of menopause, the big money in that situation is hormone replacement therapy. And the sales pitch, though, changed a little bit. And the reasoning that was used in ads and the way doctors spoke to women. So I'm just going to review a little bit. I had this slide up there before. The history of Premarin and how it was used to treat crabbiness and looking old. But then, along the way, studies started cropping up that it also caused increases in uterine cancer and breast cancer. So that was kind of happening in the background, but it wasn't stopping doctors from prescribing it. Now, however, they weren't prescribing it to keep you from being crabby or a bad wife. You know, we'd gone through the women's movement at this point, and that was not really going to make a lot of women say, "Ooh, yes, I must take this drug." Part of the women's movement was the women's health movement, which encouraged women to take responsibility for their health and to become knowledgeable. So now the approach was, it's going to prevent heart disease and dementia, but that was only based on anecdotal evidence of physicians and observational studies. Doctors seem to notice, well, my patients who take hormones, they just seem healthier. They seem to not have as many heart attacks, so I bet it's a good thing. So this industry just exploded. It's amazing to think that by 1990 it was the most commonly prescribed drug, because half the population couldn't be prescribed it. Men couldn't take it, but it was still #1 overall. That's how many people were taking it. And in 1997, their annual sales hit $1 billion. So it's a lot of motivation with all that money. Okay. So eventually, women's health lobbyists worked with the government to try to get some funding for a randomized double-blind study to see, okay, does this really do what everyone's saying it does? The Women's Health Initiative was a fantastic national, multi-site study, looked at 27 women over several years to see, and randomly assigned women. Some women got placebo, some women were put on hormone therapy. And the preliminary results were so troubling, they had to shut the study down. Because it turns out hormone replacement therapy increases the number of heart attacks or strokes, breast cancer, uterine cancer, and dementia that women experience. It didn't prevent them, it made it even worse. So, as you might imagine, lots of women stopped taking hormone replacement therapy at this point. And it's only currently basically prescribed that if a woman is really having difficulty with hot flashes and physical symptoms, there's a short-term, maybe a year or two dosage that's recommended, but that's kind of where it is right now. So the promotion of the concept of menopause as an illness just helps pharmaceutical companies wring every dollar they could at the price of a lot of women's health. Okay, so while there's a lot of money to be made by perpetuating this raging hormone myth. It hurts women in a lot of ways. One is the medicalization of women's reproductive health. The medical field has a long history of conceptualizing women's reproductive events as illnesses that need treatment. And that has resulted in excessive cesarean sections. In 1965, 6% of deliveries were by cesarean. By 1980, it was 25%. Currently, it's about 35%. And there is no corresponding increase in or decrease in infant mortality. It's not contributing to the health of babies at all. And it puts women at significant risk. Now you've got major surgery. Now you've got anesthesia. Now you've got potential hemorrhaging. And one great study in 2012 looked at 1 million births in the U.S. and found that cesarean deliveries actually increase the rate of neonatal mortality. Too many hysterectomies. What's the #1 surgery done in the U.S.? Hysterectomies. Again, only half of the population have a uterus. But this is done so often, and technology has really come up with many alternate ways that can deal with problems women have with endometriosis and some other uterine disorders. And of course, hormone treatments that have absolutely threatened women's health are another consequence. What else does this myth do? Well, it really places limitations on what we think women can do. You know, certainly women have made great strides in many different industries, but in the highest echelon of government, of business, there's this many women, teeny tiny percentages. And the hormone myth has something to do with that, because who do we think of? If I say, well, think of a CEO, think of a senator. We think of someone who's rational, steady, competent. And in this day and age, still, that sounds more like a man than a woman. It also perpetuates misperceptions about gender and mood, that idea that men are these monolithic, moodless paragons of rationality that women have been compared to over time. They don't even exist, but it keeps that idea going. And there's another great study that followed men and women for 3 to 4 months. That's a really nice, long study, and examined the number of mood swings they had and the severity of those mood swings, and they found no differences between men and women. And it also just confirms these false stereotypes that, you know, those books I showed you at the beginning, because of hormones, men and women are just so different, so we've got to treat them differently. It's appropriate to give them different opportunities, expect them to excel in different ways. Okay. And finally, if you say, oh, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm sad, but it must be my hormones, you kind of lose the opportunity to understand what's going on with you and to do anything about it. So it really takes away agency that women might otherwise have in dealing with their life and finding some positive change. Okay. So the major ideas I want you to take away from this, we can say very confidently with the science we have now, because science is always improving and adding to the story, but the science we have now says changes in hormones don't give women mental disorders. Most women, and I'm sure most of the women you know, function at a very high level across the month, across their lives. And perpetuating the hormone myth really hurts men and women. We end up putting them in these really limiting boxes of who they're allowed to be. That prevents them from experiencing the full range of the human experience. So the next time someone says that hormones make women crazy, feel free to tell them the science simply isn't there. All right, thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, my question is two. Number one, is there any statistic that shows that during this time, women work productivity, either at home or outside, goes down in any way, or the quality is compromised?
Okay, I can tell you there's lots of research, lots of studies done on menstruation, work productivity. No effect. And also, this has been known, Lita Hollingworth, one of the first female psychologists that studies in like 1907, where she found that. But there have been many later studies as well.
Second question is there any country out there that gives people, a woman, like a paid leave during the time the doctor prescribed them something?
That is a very hot topic. I have to say, there are a few countries who that are giving women an option of taking a day off if they feel like they're having the worst cramps ever, I can't deal with it. And there's a lot of controversy around it. Is this a good thing for women? Is it acknowledging something some women do experience? Or is it just damning women as a whole, saying, wow, well, there's a couple days a month we can't even count on you? So yeah, there are a couple countries, I think in Great Britain, you can get it. But yeah, there's a lot of questions about it. Yes?
Questions. One is you said there was no information until 1956 about all things like menopause, etc. Could it be that in those days these would be considered very personal matters and women did not discuss this in public before the women's movement? And so that's one thing. And secondly, all these women who are taking Midol and all these medication for cramp, I heard, I don't know exactly where, but are they at a high risk for cancer?
Does Midol put you at a higher risk for cancer?
There are certain medications that they're giving women, for their periods, for this, for hormonal treatment, hormonal this. So they're saying that, does it increase their, chances of getting cancer? And then, like I said, the information may not have, there no information because at the time women did not talk about personal issues.
Okay, so your first question, that brings up a really good point, that we are certainly much freer to talk about things these days than you think about maybe in the 1920s, 1930s. So that certainly is potential, but the fact that it didn't even show up in medical textbooks, that physicians who thought they were studying the human condition didn't think it was enough of an issue. And the second question I can't really speak to, is I'm not a physician or a medical researcher, so I don't have the answer for you there. Yes?
Please correct me, because this is my impression before I came here, and it was addressed, but just correct me about what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking that I'm talking about menopause being a developmental stage. Like, I refuse to think that the development stops at 18 and keep growing. So the way we've always understood it is a developmental stage the same way puberty is, perhaps. And definitely it's not a disorder, but the reason we label it as a disorder has to do with the paradigm being the male physiology, which we compare to, if you can comment on that and correct how I'm wrong
Well, no, I think it's a great way to look at it, that it's a similar developmental stage like puberty. There are these natural changes that's the right time of your life. That's when that's going on. And then when you're in your 40s and 50s, that's what's going on here. And it's not something to rail against or expect to be awful. And then potentially it is full of opportunity. What was the second half of your question?
And the reason that it's labeled as a disorder is something that we hear more and more nowadays, taken as a paradigm, the male physiology that perhaps does not have equivalent hormonal change, which I don't know, perhaps there is.
Men do have hormonal changes,
yes.
But the idea of men as a standard human being has been around for a long time. Again, we look at medical textbooks for, women's anatomy might be shown in a picture in the reproduction chapter, but all other pictures of human beings are all men. It's been that way for a really long time. Probably the last 10 years it's gotten a little better, but this sense that, like with heart attacks, men's symptoms for when they're going to have a heart attack are different than women's. But we didn't know that for a really long time because, women with those messy periods and whatnot, we're not going to include that in studies. So yeah, that's a really good point, that this idea of male as standard human being. Yes?
White males.
Yes.
Is the myth about it just the holdover from the asylum age, where it's everything was hysteria, where all doctors were men and a woman did something, oh my God, she's hysterical, it must be her girly parts?
Well, I think it goes back even further than that. I think that for a long time, and even today, nobody likes a mouthy woman. Nasty woman, right? That phrase, she said something aggressive to me. I didn't like that. Right, it's just another representation of that same idea that, you know, a good woman doesn't speak her mind in a sharp way, so we need to say she's sick.
And she serves you dinner.
And she serves you dinner, yes, yes.
This is more of a complicated question, but it goes a little further even, because when you do research in science for biological purposes, not just so the social sciences or the psychology work, we strongly bias against female animals in research because it gives it a whole other level of difficulty to run this experiments because then you have to sync up menstrual cycles. And that's kind of on top of everything else. So what would you propose a good way of approaching that issue, especially in neuroscience?
Women's health above the money that you need to spend? Put women's health above the money that you might go.
It's not just money, it's also the difficulty of doing the research.
I would do that. I've done research myself, so there are ways around.
Of course.
Maybe you want to study that.
Yeah, I mean, the big problem there, Carol Davis wrote that book, The Mismeasure of Women.
Great book.
Using man as a standard has created all these protocols that don't work for women. And there are physiological differences, but they're not, the point here isn't that there aren't physiological differences, it's that they don't create mental and emotional and behavioral differences.
Right, I mean, it's exactly what Danny said, that it is complicated to include women as subjects, but what Nikki is saying, it is worth the complicated look.
At some point you're going to have to do it.
Right, but yeah, I mean, I do understand methodologically, it does make it more difficult, yes.
Yeah, there are two questions. Number one, what are, you said that there are certain things that do happen around your menstruation, certain mood changes and such,
For
that
some
are more normal.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate on that? And number two, what about the 3 to 8% of women who are affected by PMS?
Okay, well first I'm going to put it out to the women. What are some normal psychological and physical changes that come with the menstrual cycle?
Body fat distribution.
Okay, yeah, feeling a little bit in here.
Well, you have bad cramps, which you never do, or something do, they can affect your mood.
Right, I mean, pain affects mood. There's no getting around that. The 3 to 8%, what do we do with them? They should be treated. A lot of them are treated with antidepressants. I mean, your functioning is being affected. So absolutely, you should be recognized and validated and treated. Or, I mean, some psychologists do cognitive behavioral therapy to maybe help someone manage what they're feeling, but much more common is to use antidepressants.
So the cramp, just to relate to this one, so the cramp, how many women experience cramps, would you say?
Oh, how many women have? Lots of women have cramps. Some women have worse cramps than others. I mean, it's probably awful cramps. I'm just guessing here, 20%. I don't know, does that sound realistic? Like so awful that you want to stay in bed. Probably.
No, because that affects mood. She said
Right.
that affects mood. Is that what's included in the 3 to 8%, but that would be on top of the 3 to 8%?
That would be included in them. That would be included.
So only up to 8% of women whose cramps,
Threaten their function. I don't know if that's true, because I think that
they thought he was fine, and then he went off and, you know, they lost track of him in the study, and his testosterone levels went back up, and he started reoffending.
Wow, I'd be interested to know how men feel about that. Is it the same way that women feel like you're indicting us all for chemicals we have in our body? Is that what you do to men, indict them all because they all have testosterone?
We have testosterone.
Right, lower amounts, absolutely. Yes.
I've got a couple questions. The slide that you showed a decrease in the incidence of depression as people age.
Yes.
Was your point just I wasn't clear on what your point was.
Oh, because there's this popular conception that when women get to the menopausal age, they're more likely to be depressed.
Okay.
When women overall are less likely to be depressed. And you saw that it was similar for men. I mean, the decreases were not as marked as they were for women, but for both genders.
And this issue of the 3 to 8%, now I know that many historically psychiatric disorders were just, and still are, based on behavioral symptoms that are presented, right? And with there need not being an organic underlying cause.
Right.
So I'm still wondering about this 3 to 8%. Are we saying that how much do they know in the literature? Is there an underlying pain that's causing these moods to present, or we don't really know that? It's just women have extreme behavioral symptoms, are then given the diagnostic label?
Right. Biological tests are not done. It's simply psychological symptoms that are documented, and that's how you get the diagnosis. Yes.
Have you studied the aspects of hormonal aspects that are as medical as well? Or that's involved in this notion, there's also some hormonal literature on how it's
Could you speak up a little bit? We can't hear over here.
the myth that the average man has a much larger libido than the average.
The question is about hormones and libido, and I can't really comment that much about that, so I'm sorry. Yes.
I've read articles that hormone replacement is good to protect bones. Is that true?
Yes, that was one of the findings of the Women's Health Initiative, that osteoporosis was decreased. But it's important to keep in mind, exercise, weight-bearing exercise can decrease osteoporosis. Your diet can. So there are other ways to address that without taking on the risks of hormone therapy. But yes, it did. It reduced the number of hip fractures and raised osteoporosis. All right. Well, thank you very much. One last, yes.
So in preparation for this, I did some very informal and show survey. So I watched your video
Speak up.
well, sorry. I want to say, I did watch the video, your video before you, that video very good, by the way. And I did some informal survey which included one psychologist, women's psychologist. And they all were very incredulous that this is true, what they're saying. And so I have a double question. First of all, why are women, and you partially answered that, why are women, even psychologists are so incredulous in what they say? And the second one is a member of a skeptic society. How do we educate people into it? I mean, so they're related against it.
Well, why psychologists would buy into this myth is hard for me to understand. I've been teaching a psychology women class for 15 years, and those textbooks have included this information all that time. Study after study after study. So I think, I can't explain why some women think for sure, some psychologists or women would think, oh no, PMS is a thing, women commonly get really cranky, really depressed, to the point that it affects their functioning. How we can combat it, I think we have to encourage people to consider other things. If you think, oh, you know, I'm such a bitch today, and I must be PMS. Well, take a second. Consider what else might be going on. I mean, it's really hard to get rid of messages that have been ingrained for so long, so early in your life. There are mothers who tell their daughters, oh, when I took one of my daughters to the doctor, and she was 10 years old, the doctor gave them a talk about menstruation. The doctor said, oh, and you're probably going to get really cranky too. I know. It's a hard thing. I encourage women to consider other opportunities, and when skeptics hear other people buying into that myth, they look at the science. It is not there.
Maybe somebody should write a book.